Distributed Database System presented by Rupali Banerjee. Today our topic is Deadlock in Distributed System. So what is deadlock? In a database, a deadlock is an unwanted situation in which two or more transactions are waiting indefinitely for one another to give up locks. Deadlock is said to be one of the most feared complications in DBMS as it brings the whole system to a halt. So, a system is in deadlock state if there exists a set of transactions such that every transaction in the set is waiting for another transaction in the set. So, in our system, there are two transactions. One is transaction T1, another is transaction T2. Now, transaction T1 holds data item X and also T1 waits for T2 to release lock on Y. But transaction T2 holds data item Y and T2 transaction waits for T1 to release lock on X. Now, this is the situation of deadlock. Now, we can say in this way, if there exists a set of waiting transaction T0, T1 till Tn-1 such that T0 waits for some data item from T1, T1 waits for some data item from T2, T2 waits for some data item from T3. In this way, Tn-1 transaction waits for some data item from T0. So, none of the transaction can progress in such situation and deadlock occurs. So, in concurrent computing, a deadlock is a state in which each process is holding a resource and waiting for some another resources acquired by some other process. So, whole system is waiting in a circular manner. So, how we can detect deadlock? The effective tool to detect deadlock is drawing a wait for graph, that is WFJ. This is an example of WFJ. This WFJ shows there is a cycle. So, we can say that deadlock occurred. So, what are the necessary conditions for a deadlock? First, mutual exclusion. Second, hold and wait. Third, no preemptions. And fourth is circular wait. We have to learn each and every conditions in detail. So, our first necessary condition for deadlock is mutual exclusion. That is, when one process acquire one resource, then no other process can acquire that resource. That is, the resource involved must be mutually exclusive. That is, it is not shareable at all. Only one process can use that resource at a time. If a resource could have been used by more than one process at the same time, then the process would have never been waiting for any resource. So, in case of mutual exclusion, only one process can hold one resource. No other process can hold that resource. Second is hold and wait. If one process holds one resource and waiting for another resource to complete the task, this situation is called hold and wait. That is, see here, this process P1 holds the resource R1, okay, and waiting for the resource R2, but the process P2 holds the resource R2 and waiting for the resource R1. So, this situation is called hold and wait. Here deadlock occurs because there can be more than one process which are holding one resource and waiting for other resource in the cyclic order. No preemption. What is that? When one process, say P3, obtained a resource, say R1, the system cannot remove it from the process control. So the system cannot remove R1 from P3 until the process has finished using the resource. Until P3 has finished using this resource R1. Now, what is the cause of deadlock? Because P3 already acquired these resources R1, but P1 needs this resource R1. Now, if we take the resource away from P3 and give it to P1, then there is no deadlock. But in case of no preemption, the rule is once a process has obtained a resource, that is once P3 obtained the resource R1, the system cannot remove it from the process control. So, the system cannot remove R1 from P3. So, deadlock arises due to the fact that a process can't be stopped once it starts. However, if we take the resource away from the process which is causing deadlock, then we can prevent deadlock. But we can say that this is not a good approach, since we take a resource away which is being used by the process. Then all the work which it has done till now can become inconsistent. Circular wait. What is that? When one process is waiting for the resource that is held by the second process, which is also waiting for the resource that is held by the third process. And this will continue until the last process is waiting for a resource held by the first process. So this is a circular chain. That is process A waiting for process B to release the resource. Process B waiting for process C to release the resource. Process C waiting for process D to release the resource, and process D waiting for process A to release the resource. So this process is known as circular wait, and deadlock occurs. Deadlock prevention. This technique ensures no deadlock by making it structurally impossible. Means we have to arrange our processes and our resources in such a way that there is no possibility of deadlock. Like if the transaction manager senses a chance of deadlock, the transaction should be aborted and restored. Because by prevention, deadlock is never gonna happen. So this technique requires no deadlock detection and recovery mechanism. There are two approaches for deadlock prevention. First one is non-preemptive approach. Second is preemptive approach. Non-preemptive approach. Logic used here is that it is better to restart younger transaction. Means what? Say T2 is one transaction which holds one data item. Now one older transaction comes and he wants that data item that is holds by T2. So because it is older transaction, then T1 will wait. But T3, if one younger transaction comes and wants that data item that is held by T2, then it will be died because it is the younger one. It is justified with the point that much time and effort is already invested in older transaction. Since older transaction waits for younger one, it may result in numerous restart of the younger transaction. So based on non-preemptive method, we first discuss what is wait and die method. Wait and die method is based on non-preemptive methods. There may be two situations. First is older transaction requests a resource from younger transaction. Because it is older one, it will wait. And younger transaction requests a resource held by the older one. Because it is younger one, so it will be died. That is, it should be rolled back or killed. Now, see the logic. Assuming Ti requests a data item that is currently held by Tj. So, it is a data item queue. It is held by the transaction Tj and Ti requests that data item. Now, if timestamp of Ti less than timestamp of Tj, so which one is older? Because timestamp of Ti is less, so Ti is older. In this case, if Ti is older than Tj, then Ti allowed to wait. Otherwise, just the opposite case, if Ti is younger than Tj, then we have to abort Ti, that is Ti dies and restart it later with the same timestamp, that is abort Ti and roll back it and restart later with the same timestamp. This is wait and die scheme. Preemptive approach. Here logic is also same like non-preemptive approach. That is, we have to give priority to the older transaction. The only difference here is that if the older transaction requests for a data item which is already locked by the younger transaction, then younger transaction is preempted by the older one. Means what? For this we have to learn wound and wait method. It is based on preemptive method. That is, there are two situations. First is older transaction requests a resource from the younger one. So, in this case, younger transaction wounded or restarted. But if younger transaction requests a resource that is held by the older transaction, then younger transaction waits. Wound and wait scheme. Assuming Ti requests a data item that is currently held by Tj, but the timestamp of Ti is less than timestamp of Tj. So which one is older? Ti is older because timestamp is less. So Ti is older than Tj. Now, if Ti requests one data item from Tj, then abort Tj. That is, we can say Ti owns Tj. Then restart Tj with the same timestamp later. But if Ti is younger transaction than Tj, then Ti allowed to wait. Types of questions comes in your university exam. Go through this question, and if you have any problem, you can ask. Many times one question comes in your exam that what is the difference between deadlock prevention and deadlock avoidance? Deadlock prevention means to block at least one of the four conditions required for deadlock to occur. What are those necessary four conditions? They are mutual exclusion, hold and wait, no preemption, and circular wait. So if we are able to block any one of them, then deadlock can be prevented. That is called deadlock prevention. And what is deadlock avoidance? In deadlock avoidance, we have to anticipate deadlock before it really occurs. We have to think that maybe there will be some deadlock and ensure that the system does not go in unsafe state. It is possible to avoid deadlock if resources are allocated carefully and safely. That is deadlock avoidance. Deadlock detection methods. Deadlock detection methods is most popular and suitable method for DBMS environment. It checks whether a deadlock is occurred or not. Once the deadlock is detected in a system, it needs to be resolved by choosing one particular transaction, and then that transaction is a victim. Then that transaction will be aborted to resolve the situation. How we can detect deadlock? We can detect deadlock by forming Wait-for Graph. Short form of Wait-for Graph is WFG. And we have to check whether there is any cycle on that graph or not. There are three techniques for deadlock detection. They are centralized deadlock detection, hierarchical deadlock detection, and distributed deadlock detection. So what is Wait-for Graph? This is a simple method available to track if any deadlock occurs in our system or not. For each transaction entering into the system, then we create one node. Means we have to create one node when one transaction enter into the system. Okay. When a transaction Ti, say, see this figure, when a transaction Ti requests for a lock on an item, say X, which is held by some other transaction Tj, then we have to draw one directed edge from Ti to Tj. And if Tj releases the item X, the edge between Ti to Tj will be dropped. In this way, we have to draw Wait-for Graph. How we can handle deadlock in distributed system? In case of distributed system, there are multiple sites. Even when there is no deadlock within a single individual site, there may be inter-site deadlocks. What is that? See this example. In a distributed system, say there are two sites S1 and S2, and the local Wait-for Graph is this for S1 and local Wait-for Graph for S2 is this. Now see, for site S1, transaction T1 is waiting to acquire lock on data item held by transaction T2. T2 is waiting to acquire lock on data item held by transaction T4. And T3 is waiting to acquire lock on data item held by transaction T1 and T2. Now see, there is no deadlock. So there is no cycle and there is no deadlock. Now here, in case of site S2. Transaction T4 is waiting to acquire lock on data item held by transaction T3. There is also no cycle, so no deadlock is there. Now, if we merge two local wait for graph and make one global wait for graph, then see there is one cycle, that is deadlock occurs. So, in case of distributed system, even there is no deadlock within a single site, there may be intersite deadlock. So, when we merge all local wait for graph and create one global wait for graph, deadlock may occur. Take another example. There is two local wait for graph for site 1 and for site 2. For site 1, P3 is waiting for a resource that is held by P2 and P2 is waiting for a resource that is held by P1. Now see, there is no cycle, so there is no deadlock in site 1. In case of site 2, P1 is waiting for a resource that is held by P4. P4 is waiting for a resource that is held by P5 and P5 is waiting for a resource that is held by P3. Now there are also no deadlock because there is no cycle. Now what is global wait for graph? We know when we merge these two graphs. How we can merge? Now see, this is local wait for graph for site 1 and see here, if I want to merge, P3 is waiting for the resource held by P5. In this way, you have to merge the whole thing. Now see here, there is one cycle. So, in case of global wait for graph, we can say deadlock occurs. Centralized deadlock detection. What is that? When one single central site is responsible for detecting a deadlock. Here, deadlock detection coordinator, that is DDC, runs on that site for creating distributed wait for graph or global wait for graph. Each scheduler prepared local wait for graph and sends to DDC periodically. Means each site creates its own local wait for graph and that local wait for graph will be sent to central site to DDC. It will send periodically to DDC. DDC receives local wait for graph from all sites and unite it to form global wait for graph, or we can say distributed wait for graph. Now it checks if there is any cycle or not. Means when all local wait for graph are merged, then it checks if there is any cycle or not. Now, if there is one or more cycles in global wait for graph, or we can say distributed wait for graph, then DDC needs to break every cycle by aborting one or more transactions. So all decisions are made here by the DDC of the central control node. It must maintain the global wait for graph constantly and periodically reconstruct it. So what is the advantage of centralized deadlock detection? Here, detection is simple and all information gathered at one central site. This permits the use of relatively simple algorithms. So, relatively simple algorithms are used because everything is in central site. But what is the disadvantage? It is very vulnerable to failure. As all information concentrated on a single site, so there is one single point of failure occur. There can be communication bottleneck around the site due to all the wait for graph information messages comes to the central site. It may incur high communication cost. Types of questions comes to your university exam. Go through these questions. Another important topic is false deadlock. What is false deadlock? Now see, suppose there is one machine A and the wait for graph is this. Here process P0 which holds the resource S and wants the resource R which is held by process P1. So this is local wait for graph for machine A. Now, another machine is B. Here, process P2 which is holding resource T and wants resource S. So, the local wait for graph for machine B is this. Now, both of these machines sends their graph to the central coordinator to the central site DDC. Now, here central coordinator maintains the union. So, the March graph is this. Now, process P1 releases resource R and asks machine B for resource T. So, two messages are sent to the coordinator. First is message 1 from machine A releasing R and message 2 from machine B waiting for T. Here there is no problem, that is no deadlock is there because process P1 first release R and then it asks for this T, okay, for this resource T. There is no problem, no deadlock is there. But if message 2 arrives first, means first message is waiting for T and then second message is releasing R, then the coordinator would then construct this graph and detect one deadlock. First message is waiting for T and then releasing R. So there is one cycle. So coordinator detect a deadlock. Such a condition is known as false deadlock. For detecting false deadlock, we have to use Lamport's algorithm. Here we have to provide global timing for the distributed system. Means all sites of the distributed system should follow one global timing. And when the coordinator gets a message that leads to a suspect deadlock, then the coordinator sent everybody a message saying, I just received a message with a timestamp T, which leads to deadlock. If anyone has a message for me with an earlier timestamp, please send it immediately. Now, when every machine has replied either positively or negatively, the coordinator will see that the deadlock has really occurred or not. So, in this way, coordinator of the central site can detect deadlock, rather false deadlock. Types of questions comes to your university exam. Our next topic is hierarchical deadlock detection. What is that? In some cases, we can see that the deadlock involves only a few sites which are very close to each other, and those sites can discover the deadlock without having to communicate at distant site. So at distant site or with the distant site, there is no deadlock, but within some close site, they discover the deadlock. In such case, hierarchical detection is better. So, why hierarchical deadlock detection is required? Here, communication cost incurred with this technique is considered to be lowered. Here, nodes are organized or arranged in a tree pattern, and hierarchy is formed, and a tree of deadlock detector is formed, and deadlock is detected at the parent node or root node. Principle. In this, the sites are organized in a tree structure with one site at the root of the tree. Each node except the leaf node has the information about the dependent nodes, because leaf node has no dependent nodes, but other node has the dependent nodes, so each node has information about the dependent nodes. Deadlock is detected by the node that is the common ancestor of all sites which have resource allocation in conflict. Take one example. See, in this figure, this is master control node and this orange node is level 1 control node and this yellow node is level 2 control node and green node is level 3 control node and these are blue nodes are all leaves. Now see, in this, set of nodes are required to report periodically to a control site node. So each set reports periodically to its control sites, like centralized algorithm. The site or nodes are logically connected in a hierarchical structure such as tree. A site can detect deadlock in its descendants. So particular site, say here, can detect deadlock in its descendants. The master control site forms the root of the tree with leaf node having no control responsibility. This blue node having no control responsibility. And interior nodes, this orange and yellow node, these nodes, green nodes, these nodes, they are interior nodes serving as a controller of their branches. So say this green node is the controller of its branches. So what is the advantage of hierarchical deadlock detection? It is more reliable than centralized deadlock detection as every control node controls its branches. It has no or very low dependency on a single site. And what is the disadvantage? The implementation of this technique is very complex. Deadlock detection becomes complex when site or communication failure occurred. Types of questions comes in your university exam. Distributed deadlock detection. In this deadlock detection technique, the responsibility of deadlock detection is distributed among all sites. So in case of centralized deadlock detection, it is the responsibility of particular centralized site to detect the deadlock. All local wait for graph is sent to the centralized site, and there those graph will be marched and detect that centralized site detect the deadlock. But in case of distributed deadlock detection, here the responsibility of deadlock detection is distributed among all sites. Each site shares same and equal responsibility. Actually, there is no difference between local deadlock detection and global deadlock detection. Each local deadlock detection shares its local wait for graph with every other site of that network, especially those involved in its potential deadlock cycle. So, what is the principle? All sites are responsible for detecting a global deadlock because all sites send its local wait for graph to the other site. Global state graph distributed over many sites. Then when global state graph is formed, it is also distributed in many sites. Several of them participate in detection, means many sites are participating for detection of the deadlock. Detection initiated when a process suspected to be deadlocked. So, what is the advantage? Advantage is there is no single point failure because every site is participating in the deadlock detection. But what is the disadvantage? It is very difficult to implement. Types of questions comes in your university exam. Go through this question, and if you are facing any problem, comment me in the comment section. For getting more and more updates, please like, share and subscribe my channel. That's all for today. Thank you.